What if I told you that there's a series about a handicapped horse rider that pairs up with an Italian guy whose power is literally to spin balls, who literally go on a journey to fight against the President of the United States to stop him from collecting all of the 9 parts of a corpse, and that corpse is actually the corpse of Jesus Christ himself? Just take a moment to process that, and as all of you culture people know, this is literally the plot of one of the greatest mangas of all time, Steel Ball Run. Like literally, Araki wrote a story including literally Jesus Christ as basically the first stand user. Like, what even is this concept? It actually just almost makes me laugh to think about or explain, but he did it in a way that actually kind of makes sense. Now, with this video, of course, I'm going to have to start off with some sort of quick disclosure. Yes, I do believe in Jesus. However, this video is not for me to try and convince you of the same or push any sort of ideology on you. Instead, I'll purely be taking sort of an analytical analysis to the fact that Steel Ball Run literally has Jesus Christ in it, and that Araki put several biblical references all throughout this part. And just know that Steel Ball Run is a fictional story that basically takes its own spin on the story of the Bible, spawning, well, one of the most bizarre mangas. It's also one of the greatest mangas. But how did we even get here? How did we get to the point of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure to where we're incorporating Jesus Christ as a stand user? Because honestly, if you think about it, all sort of different mythology and mythos have so much representation in general media and other anime as well, like Greek mythology, Aztec, Norse, and even just general folklores. I mean, even look at records of Ragnarok. They got every sort of mythological figure fighting in there except for the one that you would think of Jesus Christ. And yes, they incorporated Adam into it, into one of the most mid animes of all time, but it almost just feels like something is missing about how everyone just seems to not want to add Jesus Christ for some reason. It almost feels like a taboo to speak about it for some reason, and I can get somewhat why, and we'll definitely delve into it in this video on why it's somewhat controversial. But then all of a sudden, here comes Hirohiko Araki, who does whatever he wants, whenever he can, and he writes an actually bizarre story making Jesus Christ one of the most important parts of his manga, and it did it in a way that actually makes sense in the context of the manga. And as you read Steel Ball Run, you can tell that Araki either knows a lot or had to research and read a lot about the Bible, because his references are actually very accurate and he implemented them all throughout the manga, which I'll be going over. There's 2 main questions that I want to answer in this video that I had as I was reading Steel Ball Run, and that's why is Jesus Christ even in this manga, and what purpose does he serve towards the narrative of the Steel Ball Run? The story of Jesus Christ in Steel Ball Run is told from the perspective of Joseph of Arimathea, which in the Bible is the person who assumed the responsibility of the burial of Jesus after his crucifixion. But this is Jojo, so instead of Jesus being buried for 3 days and then rising again and appearing to over 500 people, instead, as Joseph goes to bury Jesus after he's crucified, which once again, I'm reading a Jojo's manga and seeing a panel about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. This is just so insane. But in the Jojo's timeline, as Joseph goes to bury him, Jesus does not just rise from the dead. He just gets up and says, "All right, I'm gonna head out and go east." And when Joseph asks him if he's ever gonna see him again, Jesus points in the sand towards a map that forms, showing him 9 locations, which we later find that these are the 9 locations within America that Jesus's corpse parts would later be found. Jesus then leaves and states everything is circular if it rotates, and just walks out into the light. Basically, Jesus just rose from the dead, drew a map, said if it spins it's a sphere, and left without elaborating anything more. Jesus then heads towards America, along the way learning new languages and cultures, building a ship and sailing towards America, living out the rest of his days with the Native Americans of the land. And shortly after his death, which of course the causes of his death are not mentioned, an earthquake hits the land which spreads the parts of his corpse across America through several different means of things such as wind, rain, and animals, with one part landing in the desert. With years later, as soldiers are marching through this desert, extremely dehydrated, one of the soldiers dies, collapsing in the sand, absorbing the corpse heart into his body, not only reviving him, but also causing him to rise towards the top of society to become the president that is known as Funny Valentine. Now that begs the question of why did Araki even make this the general backstory of Steel Ball Run? Because honestly, Jojo's Bizarre Adventure is a series that's, well, pretty bizarre to say the least. And not only that, but Steel Ball Run is not just another part of JoJo's, but also the major reset for the series that would shape all of the following parts that would take place in this new timeline slash universe, with Araki deliberately choosing this plot point to focus on. So why is that? But honestly, knowing why Araki does anything is pretty hard, despite knowing that he likes fashion, he writes a banger of a manga, and that he's a vampire because this man does not age. You look at his wiki page even, and it's like 2 paragraphs long. There's not too much known about him, but just my luck, Araki actually gave us a hint into his background in an interview that just might explain this. With back in 2001, while I was still learning to walk, Araki did an interview with Kazuma Kaneko. Who is that, you might ask? Well, you know, just a game artist and designer for a little known series at the time that goes by the name of Shin Megami Tensei, or you know, what would later spawn as Persona. In this interview, honestly, they're just kind of chatting and yapping about random topics, but Araki does bring up the fact that he grew up in a Protestant Christian school throughout his childhood and that he would have to read the Bible daily, which has influenced some of his writing. Which also keep in mind, this interview was in 2001, about halfway through the serialization of Stone Ocean, which that part alone has several biblical references, but this was just years before, as Araki was already starting to plan for what would become Steel Ball Run. And it also is very interesting that he was raised in the Christian school, because Christianity isn't really that popular in Japan, with there being estimates that Christians take up less than 1% of the total population of Japan. Despite the fact that apparently there's a place in Japan that Jesus Christ went to preach during his missing years of the Bible, and apparently that's something that a lot of people believe in the area, but that's a story for another time. Also, apparently he has addressed that he is no longer Christian, with many people saying that he is now a deist, but the link to that interview apparently says that it's no longer available, so I can't really confirm nor deny that, but Araki is just very mysterious. We may just never know too much about him. But this does help shed some light into why Araki incorporated this into Steel Ball Run, because even more than just Jesus Christ, there are several biblical references all throughout this part. The whole character of Lucy Steele in this part is basically a representation of the Virgin Mary from the Bible, as she's only about 14 years old, which is also the age of the Virgin Mary. And also there's the whole plot point that in a supernatural way, when the corpse parts are gained, she is impregnated with the corpse of Jesus Christ to give birth to him. Yes, that sentence is exactly what it sounds like and makes as much sense as it needs to be. It's JoJo's, things like this just happen, but Araki specifically included the plot of Lucy having to give birth to Jesus Christ as a reference to the story of the virgin birth from Mary. Now, with all of these references, what is the purpose of adding all of this to Steel Ball Run, and is it even necessary? Jesus is more than just a corpse part and a figure within the series to grant people stand powers. He is basically the guiding hand for the characters, as whoever gains the corpse parts at some points get not only visions of him, but also guidance. One example of this is obviously in the Civil War arc. As Johnny gains another corpse part, he suddenly gets a vision from Jesus who warns Johnny to not shoot if he doubts, then a new path will open up, which not only helps Johnny to win the fight, but also low-key is just kind of good life advice to follow. One thing to know is that throughout Steel Ball Run, it's never explicitly mentioned that this is Jesus Christ, as he is never formally named and he's just kind of this figure within the series, but very clearly this is referencing Jesus Christ. And Araki including him helped to build a lot of depth into the theology of the JoJo series and created a very interesting story of basically a spin-off of the Bible that created this timeline of the JoJo Bizzare Adventure series. And although the story of Jesus has become somewhat sort of a taboo in some media, I do think that Araki implemented it in a way that does not disrespect any sort of Christians, but also creates a fantasy story that he has full freedom to still be respectful, but create his own lore. And honestly, I think Araki deserves some praise for that, and I'm very interested to see how they will incorporate this into the Steel Ball Run anime, especially as it gets adapted into the West.